Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Inside ND Sports Podcast. I'm Tyler James, and I'm joined once again by the one and only Eric Hansen. Together, we cover Notre Dame football, recruiting, and more for InsideNDSports.com on the Rivals Network. The Inside ND Sports Podcast is presented by MyBookie. Sunday is the one day of the week I get to think about football that has nothing to do with work, and with my Chicago Bears playing against the Arizona Cardinals in the late afternoon window, I'll have a chance to watch more of the early games again this Sunday, and I can add some stakes by heading to MyBookie, the one book that has your back. There's no fluff, no second guessing, just straight up action with the decisions in your hands as you're looking for an edge. Maybe you're eyeing a money line or you really like the over on a game total. MyBookie has what you need to make a good wager. And MyBookie has hooked us up with a deal for our Inside ND Sports Podcast listeners. You can sign up with promo code INDS to secure your first deposit of up to $1,000 with the 100% deposit bonus. Click the link in our podcast description and remember to use code INDS to get this incredible deal. Bet anything, anytime, from anywhere with MyBookie, the sports book that gives you control. Happy betting, and may the luck of the Irish be with you. Notre Dame's in the middle of its second off week following an impressive 51-14 victory over Navy on Saturday. That's given us extra time for deep dives on Notre Dame football this week. And when I think of college football deep dives, I think of Pro Football Focus. So we reached out to Pro Football Focus college football analyst Dalton Wasserman to share some knowledge with us this week. Dalton, thanks for joining us.
Appreciate you guys having me on.
Dalton, just to start, to get an understanding or perspective from you, what's been your impression of Notre Dame this season?
I think you've actually seen some gradual improvement. Obviously, after the NIU loss, there was a lot of things that needed to be looked at, but I think they've found their rhythm and their identity as a team. First, offensively, just leaning into what's become an elite run game with Jeremiyah Love, with Jadarian Price, and then using Riley Leonard, even more as a runner to complement those guys. And I think taking the ball out of Leonard's hands a little bit. Riley Leonard, his first two games this year, he had 38 and 34 dropbacks, and since then he's only hit 31 time. You're seeing, right around 25, 27 dropbacks per game is kind of the key to it. And they're riding this run game. They're riding this defense. They're getting ahead of teams early in games. And then they're just continuing that game script, really, that you've seen them use in most of their games this year, right? Even the Texas A&M game when they were just going to ride the run game in a close one. But you look at all of these games, they've gotten out ahead early. They've taken advantage of opponents' mistakes, and they've ridden this triple-headed run game right here that's just been one of the best in the country this year.
Especially when it comes to Riley Leonard and quarterback play and so forth, when you're looking at somebody that's trending upwards. I guess when we look at the PFF numbers, and I think his 91.2 rating this week was the best of his career, both at Duke and Notre Dame. Do you look at the PFF ratings as predictive, or do you look at it as a snapshot and there's no trending things to kind of read into it?
I think if you see consistent things week in and week out, you can start to predict it, and based on opponent matchups too, as far as a certain guy's strengths versus certain guy's weakness. I think at first, if it's your first time looking at it, you look at it as a snapshot, because it is kind of what it is what has this guy done so far week to week and throughout the season, and even digging into it. I always look at certain things underneath the overall grades, where it's like, okay, is he great in play action? Is he great outside the pocket? Is he great against the blitz? So there's all sorts of different ways you can go about it, and it can be a lot of fun to go down all of those roads. But I think it's a little of both. I would say at first, though, it would be a snapshot of what he's already done.
And because it's called Pro Football Focus, I know you guys have your college division and so forth, but when you look at those numbers, do they tell you anything about Riley Leonard's aptitude for being an NFL quarterback? Do you look at those numbers to help you determine whether that's actually happening, or if this is a guy, he better count his NIL money now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a set of things that we have, that we have a set of things called the stable metrics, right? And there's a certain list of them. When you talk about one of the big ones is production in a clean pocket, right? When the situation is right, and you have the ability to make the throws with no distraction or no disruption, do you make the throws? I think that's been better this year. I think you talk about things like throwing past the sticks and being able to push up first downs through the air, right? Things like early down production, first and second down, when, on late downs, everybody knows you're throwing, so it can be kind of a different game. But we have a set of stable metrics that really that helps us kind of loosely predict, like, who's going to be the better guys. Like when you look at the draft last year, last year's draft with Caleb Williams, with Jaden Daniels, with even like a Bo Nix who's playing well now in the NFL. These are all guys who rated really highly in this set of stable metrics that we have that are more predictive than some of the unstable stuff.
Dalton, you mentioned the running game, and Jeremiyah Love is someone who I don't think he's in the conversation for many folks in terms of the best running back in the country, but I think when you watch him, it's just like, I don't know that there's a lot of guys in college football that have the potential at running back for him. He doesn't necessarily have the stats right now to be in the conversation with the top running backs in the country, but how good do you think Jeremiyah Love is already at this point in his career?
I mean, he's terrific. When you talk about for us, so let's just take the grading. He's even, the grading can kind of alleviate for the sample size a little bit, and he's got an 89.1 grade. That's just outstanding, right? I mean, you talk about running backs up in that territory. That's the sixth best in the country. So if he were to get more carries like some of these other top guys toward the top of this list are getting, you're talking about 6.4 yards per carry. You're talking about 4.5 yards after contact per carry, and I think that's what he's brought is a similar dimension to what Audric Estime brought the team last year, right? Just this physical guy who just plays right into the identity of the football team, breaking tackles, running through tacklers, picking up extra yards. And you know what? I think he's a guy that suits this team so well, and he so consistently gives positive yardage out of these runs that's really how Notre Dame needs to run their offense. And it's been so good. And then obviously at any point you can have the design run game or read option with Riley Leonard off of it. Love, you're absolutely right. On a rate basis and what he's done with the opportunities he's given, he's played like an elite football player. Once he gets more volume, you'll see those numbers catch up.
So, Dalton, I want to ask you a little bit about the mechanics of the PFF ratings, but before we get to that, I wonder how you ensure consistency. For example, you guys are doing the overnights on Saturday night and you have them all ready for Sunday morning. So what if somebody's Keurig machine breaks down and they're not as on top of the game film as the next guy? How do you make sure that those numbers are consistent from the Sun Belt to Notre Dame to the SEC in terms of evaluations?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things about that. One, and I did the grading for 3 years. It's a really rigorous training process that we put people through just to get into it, just to be able. We have a real standard set of benchmarks that you have to hit just to get into it, just to start doing it. Now, obviously, our more senior guys, on the first broadcast run through, might be a little better at it than some of the rookies. But every game also gets looked over twice through. We get the all 22 even on the college side, and our review team, and I was on it for a bit, is just fantastic at going through those games and breaking down the concepts on the all 22 also. So they all get watched twice through. It's not just the TV copy that we're watching live on Saturdays. That gives us obviously a very good base based on the skills of our analysts and what we've trained them to do. And then the really fine details we go through on the all 22 when we have those end zone shots, when we have some other angles, when we know what teams are trying to do in coverage. That's the part that makes us feel really good about it, is that it's not just once, it's twice through, and it's effective. And even, again, our first run guys are trained very, very well.
Dalton, since we talked a little bit about the grade, I wanted to, you mentioned you started on with some of the gradings. I think I saw you started with the data collection team. I don't know the terms exactly, but can you walk us through what that looks like? What does that job entail, and sort of how intensive it is?
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned on Saturdays, we have between, 600 people who throughout the day, there's several different aspects of the games that we go through. It's the grading, it's the player charting. There's, eventually we get to the all 22 stuff during the week as well. But it's breaking down every single play. We have a scale that we use that you evaluate every single player on every single play, right? So if it's a neutral thing where a guy just kind of does his job without any real impact, cool, then you can kind of leave it neutral. And then, it can be based on in the passing game, just the quality of the throw or the quality of the catch. Or as far as upfront blocking, as anybody could guess, the offensive line is the hardest part of it, and figuring out the concept, and then figuring out maybe if it's in pass protection, if a defense is running a crazy blitz or a stun or something, how we should pick it up and things like that. So it's play to play. It's very granular when it comes to, because like me as a grader, I wouldn't come up with the final number that comes up for the grade for the game. We have systems and people smarter than me that make those things, but we go through every single play. We look at every single player on every play, and it breaks down one. We're just again trying our best to establish what the offense is trying to do, how the defense is countering that, vice versa, and then figuring out just how successful each player was given their assignment.
Anthony Treash is on Notre Dame's staff now, and I think, unfortunately for him, I think one of the most visible games for him was the Northern Illinois game where people saw him talking to Marcus on the sideline. But obviously, Marcus feels like there's great value there. What are some of the things with his background, with your background, that could be so helpful to a head coach in the flow of a game? What do you feel like are the best contributions that Anthony can make during a game?
I think the biggest thing with having a job like that is, and I try to do this around here, even with our shows and stuff, is being able to combine the analytics and what you see on a football field, right? And Anthony, I think, is not only is he a brilliant analytics guy, he's got a brilliant football mind, right? And combining those two things and knowing that, look, certain decisions, no decision is 100%. The idea behind analytics is that you do it over and over a long period of time, and you have a high percentage of successes, right? But no, he's a brilliant football mind. He's a brilliant analytics mind. And I think to be able to marry the two is incredibly important for a team, right? Like I'm not, Marcus Freeman may not be an analytics expert, but he knows it can help to some extent, right? So no, I mean, Anthony, I think you can see it in future weeks and, beyond the NIU game that he's gone in there and helped this team out with some of those close decisions. I even think about in the Notre Dame game or the Louisville game that there was a couple of them, but it's one of those things where if you're too extreme to one side or the other, if you're only looking at analytics and you don't know what you're seeing on a football field, that can be detrimental, right? And in the other way around too, I think nowadays, if you don't use analytics at all, when it seems like everybody is, then it's kind of like you might be blind to some things that can help you with decision making. So I think Anthony, one thing he's done here, you could tell, I've met him a couple of times, you could tell hearing him talk is just he knows both sides of it and he knows how to put them together.
Yeah, he was certainly on the end of probably some unwarranted heat just because people were mad back then, and he just happened to be on camera probably more than was necessary just because of his location next to Marcus Freeman on the sidelines. I wanted to circle back to a couple of Notre Dame defenders who were very important to Notre Dame last season and still are this year. That's Riley Mills and Howard Cross III. They have not graded as highly this season from PFF. What do you think is the biggest difference between what they were doing last season and this season?
It's kind of odd with them because they're to me they're one of the best defensive tackle duos in the country, and it just seemed like it felt like teams I think were attacking them more often between the tackles and having success with it. But I think the big thing though is they're starting to get hot now, right? You look at Riley Mills, his last 4 or 5 games have been a lot better than the start. Howard Cross, kind of the same thing, where his first 3 games were a little bit rough. I think you look back to that NIU game, and the one thing that was, I think, the most disturbing about that game was it felt like NIU was the more physical team at times in that game, and that really obviously shouldn't be the case with Notre Dame. So these two guys, I think the big thing is they're getting hot now. You're really starting to see, especially Riley Mills as a pass rusher, how good was he against Georgia Tech? Just a huge game. These are 2 really good football players, especially in tandem, and I think they're starting to heat up now. It's funny. I don't. It's hard to say what it was early in the year. I think teams just attack them, especially when you talk about NIU's a physical team. Texas A&M at the beginning of the year, they're a very physical team in their run game. Some of these teams can just be hard to defend inside when you rely on these 2 guys so much. But I think they're heating up, and you can see a lot of things in the middle of this Notre Dame defense starting to heat up.
Dalton, when we get to the end, I want you to give people some info on how they can subscribe to Pro Football Focus. But if they do that and they're poking around, like I look at the snap counts and I look at the overall grades, and there's a little bit of deeper analytics I'll look at. But what are maybe some stats that are some of your favorites that you like to look at for different positions that you say, well, this is really what people should be looking at?
Oh, wow. There's so many of them because I spend all day digging through them sometimes just for fun.
Let's do offensive linemen. Let's do that first.
Offensive linemen. I always love to go in and look at it. There's a couple of things that we have. We'll start on the pass blocking side. We have something called true pass blocking grade. And if you go under pass blocking tab in all of our grades and reports and stuff. What that does is take out situations. So we have our pass blocking grade, which is all pass plays, right? But our true pass blocking grade takes out things like screen passes, right? And things like if the quarterback gets rid of the ball in like a second and a half, right? So it really puts in more of those true drop back situations where, let's say, a quarterback needs 2.5 seconds and there's no like or design rollout and there's no screen pass, like, so that those get taken out, they get filtered out. How good is let's say an offensive tackle when it's just a true obvious passing situation, everybody knows you're throwing it and they just need to just take the kick step and protect, right? That's a fun one. And then as far as, let's say run blocking, I always like to split it up by schemes. That's always fun for me, is you go, who's a really good zone blocker? Who's a really good gap blocker? Who's a good, even behind the scenes, I can look at stuff like, who's really good at pulling and getting out in space and doing things like that. So those are some of the offensive linemen for sure on both sides of it.
Dalton, one guy I wanted to ask you about is Xavier Watts. He's continued to play at a high level for a second season in a row now. What do you think of him as a potential NFL player? What do you think his draft stock could be with the way he's put together 2 big seasons?
I think he's going to get picked pretty highly, at least on day 2. And I to be honest with you, I know he won, was it the Nagurski Award last year? Yeah. I think he's actually been more consistently sound this year. When you talk about, I think his tackling's been better. His run support has been a lot better. And because he is a guy, he's very aggressive to the football, right? And I think you can see at times last year where he was kind of almost the riverboat gambler back there. I think he's playing with more discipline. Again, the better tackling is a big thing. I think that was the biggest question coming into the year for me, and it's gotten a lot better. I think he's got a more well-rounded game now. Plus, he's a ball hawk, and anytime you have a guy who has a nose for the football like that, is going to get drafted. I think he's the way he's played this year, I think is better than last year. Last year, yes, he won the award. He had the 7 interception. He made a lot of plays on the ball, but I could argue he's a better, more well-rounded football player this year. I think at least right now, I think he's an easy day 2 pick.
All right, let me circle back to Riley Leonard then. When you look at him, do you see an NFL quarterback? And if not, is there still time for him to change minds this year?
Yeah, he's a tougher one because I think what you have is a guy who plays better when you kind of take things out of his hands, right? He's not a high volume passer. This year, there's a big split between him and a clean pocket and under pressure. And yes, the clean pocket stuff for predictive stuff is more important, but is there a scenario where he can become a quarterback that can carry you through big drives and big games with his arm? That's going to be the biggest question. So for me, I think Riley Leonard, he probably gets a day 3 shot. I mean, he's very athletic and his leadership obviously is off the charts. We've seen that at Duke and at Notre Dame, but I think there's some polish, especially as a downfield passer, that's still kind of missing. We've seen it on occasion this year, right? Some play action shots. There was one against Louisville. There was several against against Navy last week. I think that's the element, is can he throw downfield and can he throw in those obvious passing situations? And we may see it at some point this year when Notre Dame needs, if they're down 6 or down 7 and they have that drive that needs to bring them back. Can he do that in those obvious passing situations? Because right now, I think it's more that he's an athlete, an athletic runner that fits this system as opposed to a consistently great drop back passer.
Dalton, I think when people see PFF grades, a lot of times, you could obviously compare them to others, like you mentioned, like Jeremiyah Love ranked 6th in college football among running backs. I'm curious if you're trying to look at like an offense per se, like what sort of grades should you see on an offense that say, okay, this is a good to great offense? Is there a certain number of guys that have ratings at 75 or above? You might not have like an exact formula, but if you give folks a sense of like what a good offense should look like in terms of those grades, do you have sort of guidelines?
Yeah. So actually, it's the same scale for anybody, not just offensive guys. It's that. So basically, think about the baseline is right at 60. Okay, that's like essentially like a traffic cone. Like a guy has no like real positive or negative impact as a net on the game, right? So if you're getting into the 70s now, okay, you're talking about like starters, like solid starters, guys who should be on the football field, like a good amount, right? High 60s and into the 70s. You get into the 80s and you start talking about, okay, these are some of our best football players on our team, right? And you get into the high 80s and you talk about a guy who's really starting to, you like, so a Jeremiyah Love at an 89.1, you're like, wow, that's a close to an elite football player. That's the sixth best running back in the country. Or, I think about Riley Leonard right now is grading like right in an 80. Like that's very good, right, overall. So, you're talking about that. And then you get up into the 90s and you have like some of the best players in the country, right? Like Shedeur Sanders, a guy like that off the top of my head is at like 90, 91, or Ashton Jinty's at like a 96, which is just ridiculous. It almost breaks the scale. But yeah, no, I mean, you think of it like that. And then, on the downside, then you talk about, below a 60, you get into those low 50s and 40s and things like that. And it's guys who probably, they're struggling or they shouldn't be playing as much or what have you. So I think that's what you're looking for is obviously your star players are going to be very, very high. But one of the things you like about well-rounded teams, and I've seen like almost all of Notre Dame's starters pretty much are up in like at least the high 60s or 70s. That's something you want to see when you talk about the depth of your football team and not having a whole lot of weaknesses. I would say once you start getting above like 65, okay, especially across the course of a good chunk of the season, you talk about like, okay, that guy's at least decent. Like that's a guy who can help us on the field for sure.
So you mentioned that you're not as involved like with the team grades and so forth, but just eye test and everything else and Notre Dame scores. Do you see them as a team that should be in the playoff field? And number two, a team that can win a playoff game?
I do think as long as they win out, I do think they need to win out. I think you get in dicey territory if they lose another game, especially with the NIU loss on there and not having a conference title game. If they get to 11-1, they're absolutely a playoff team. I mean on that. And the Texas A&M win looks better and better every week. Look, Navy's a really good football team. I think people might discount that because they blew them out, but that's a darn good team that they beat by 37 points. And Army coming up, that's a threat. That's a real threat. Again, that's a good team that they'll be beating. That's a top 25 team, and I think that's legit. Notre Dame, as far as if and when they get into the playoffs, yeah, I think they could win a playoff game, absolutely. And it starts with their defense. It's an elite defense with so much star power. All the guys we've talked about, Mills, Cross, Watts. I know Ben Morrison is hurt, but I really like the way Leonard Moore is playing in his stead. Jack Kaiser at linebacker is starting to get hot, too. He's a guy I really like. Drake Bowen's been good. This defense can travel and they can compete with anybody. It'll just be a matter of if their offense can stay in their comfort zone, leaning on that run game, getting those 300 rushing yards, 350 rushing yards that they want. But their defense, they could beat anybody with their defense, absolutely, because they can stay in these games and drag it down to the pace that they need to. They just need to finish out this regular season with these last 4 wins, and they'll get in.
Dalton, I've had the opportunity to see like what some of the back end PFF stuff looks like in terms of like how it's all cataloged, the video you can pull up and all that stuff. And I think if the public saw some of that, I think they'd be like, wow, this is like the depth of like knowledge available here is immense, even though some people may agree or disagree with the PFF grades. What would, from working from PFF and even maybe from your time before PFF, how it's changed, what do you think is the biggest misconception about Pro Football Focus that you hear from the average college football fan?
Honestly, I think it's part of it is the question that you asked me before, and how do we get to some of these numbers, and then just what do they mean, right? When it comes to, some people I think focus a little too much on like, oh, this guy's 1 point better than that guy. In the grand scheme of things, like 1 point across the whole season is still like nothing. That's like 2 or 3 plays, right? So I think it's understanding the scale. I think it's understanding that, look, we have great football minds on our staff that analyze these games. They know what they're looking at. There's former college players. We have former coaches on our staff that analyze these games and go over it. We have guys who are really passionate about this stuff, and it's a great group of people. I'll tell you right now, working on that side for the 4 years that I did, the data side and the stuff behind the scenes and the grading and all that, it's just a great set of people, man. There's nobody. It's never personal. There's nobody ever going out and biasing against your team because literally, in-house, the first thing they tell you when you get into this process, especially the grading process, is like, listen, if we see any bias, you're done. Like that's not how this works here, right? So no, it's just a bunch of great football minds who love doing it, and what's the famous one? We always get people between Myles Garrett and TJ Watt always fighting about us, and it's like, listen, we don't like either one of them better than the other. They're both future Hall of Famers, okay? So I think it's just we do have a set of great football minds on our staff, and they do such amazing work every single week. With, I can tell you, a massive workload. I mean, I used to do it 14, even 16-hour days on the Saturdays. That, I mean, man, it's a whirlwind for sure, but it's so much fun, and I think it's just a matter of understanding what the grades are and what they tell you, and that they're not, they're not always like slight differences. They're not always absolute, right? I think it's more and more when you look at guys like in a certain range of grades, right? Like say between an 85 and a 90, where you go, those are all very similar football players, right? Yeah. It's not like, oh, this guy's 1 point better, so he has to be better. Like, and there's so much context behind it too. And that's the part you mentioned, digging in on the behind the scenes stuff. I always like to find the context to things, right? Because you've seen it, like, I'll have access to something like, oh, this guy's better against single high than he is against two high, or these blitzes or these looks and things like that. So there's so much that goes into it, and it's a lot of fun breaking it down. And our analysts are so good at breaking it down.
The last one from me before we get into your information too is Ben Morrison is an interesting guy, because you wonder if, like in any elite corner, if they're throwing the ball to the other side of the field to avoid him. When you're like picking All-American teams and stuff like that, do you factor that in with cornerbacks where people are going to avoid them sometimes, so you may not get as true of a number of their value?
Yeah, sometimes it can be harder, especially at the college level, where we're not doing our all coverage process yet. We're starting to get into it. We just need more of the manpower, because it's a thing in the NFL that we do every week. Once we get all 22, is we grade separation as well on the routes, but we don't quite have the hands to do that for college yet. So it can be hard, because we do give higher grades for guys who do make plays on the ball, right? Pass breakups and interceptions and things like that. So it might seem like Ben Morrison, like this year, right? He's got 2 pass breakups, doesn't have an interception. They weren't throwing the ball in his direction a whole lot. And honestly, if I were coaching, I wouldn't throw the ball to Ben Morrison either. I mean, he's a great football player. So, and we have a similar thing even with Will Johnson from Michigan, where, yes, he's made a handful of plays. I think he's got 2 pick sixes this year, but so rarely targeted that it's hard to – you really have to explain almost the context of it. I look at Morrison. Okay, let's look at the last 2 years with him. 2 years ago, he had 6 interceptions, right? Last year, he had 3 interceptions and 8 pass breakups. And you go, yeah, the grades are higher, because, it's the one thing that we're trying to sometimes we have to explain and kind of figure out, why is this guy so good, but his grade is a little bit lower than you might think, lower than a 90. And it's like, he doesn't have even an opportunity to be great, because he's so shut down. So we're working on figuring out some other metrics to really better represent how good of a player like that is right now. And I think it's going to help a lot once we get more hands into getting into our separation grading process, and just getting more hands into it on the college side. I think that's really going to start showing.
All right, Dalton, if folks want to subscribe to PFF, how would they do so? And then if they want to follow more of your work, what's the best way to do that?
So PFF.com, we have the PFF Plus subscription for less than $10 a month. You have access to all these grades that we've talked about today. We've got fantasy tools and lineup optimizers that honestly I won my league with last year, so I can tell you it works. We've got betting tools. We've got draft season is coming. Trevor Sikkema's adjusting the draft board every week, and our mock draft simulator is the best in the business. So there's a bevy of stuff to get into with the PFF Plus subscription. That's on PFF.com. As far as I go, myself and Max Chadwick have the PFF College Football Show on YouTube Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. We go over all the games, the big games from the previous day, break down what happened. We're going to start breaking down what we think of this playoff race here, I think, starting this week. And then on Tuesdays is our preview show, Tuesday nights at 6 Eastern. We break down all the biggest games coming, all the implications from that, all the matchups. We each take a side of the ball and pick out a matchup, make our predictions. So we have a lot of fun with both of those. Tune into those for all the best previews. And certainly, I believe that at the very least, that Notre Dame Army game is certainly, whichever week that is, that's going to come up as a preview, and probably the USC game at the end of the year, too. Those are kind of the 2 biggest games left.
All right, Dalton, we appreciate you taking time to talk to us, and best of luck the rest of the season.
Absolutely. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Before we get to our question segment, I wanted to remind our listeners of our long-standing subscription promo for InsideNDSports.com. We're offering a 30-day free trial to our podcast listeners who want to try out a subscription to the site. That will get you access to all of our premium football analysis, our recruiting coverage, and the Insider Lounge message board, where you don't have to wait for the next podcast to ask us a question. You can take advantage of this offer by using promo code NDPOD, that's NDPOD, when you sign up for a subscription on InsideNDSports.com. You can also find a link to the deal in the podcast description or show notes. All right, now it's time for questions. You can submit questions to us on Twitter or the Insider Lounge message board before every podcast. I'm at TJamesND and Eric's at eHansenND. We were a little light on questions, so we dipped into Eric's weekly live chat for some questions. So thanks to those folks for having questions available for us. The first one we have is from Tom in Evanston, Illinois. It looked like there were some issues when Navy dropped 8 into coverage. I recall that Leonard ran into a sack. Did Navy do that more than the one time? Is it still a bugaboo for ND, or will Leonard just start running when teams do it?
Tyler did a really good film review on this, so I'm going to let him go into more detail with it. But I think, having talked to Mike Denbrock the week before the Navy game, he was talking about not only did Riley need to improve in terms of his judgment with passing, and he's seen it, he also needed to do that in this running game. I think people look at him and felt like this was a polished, finished product, and not necessarily, and when to run and when not to run. And I think he's getting better at that. And I think I do remember the play that you're talking about, Tom, where he ran into a sack, but I think he's getting better with that. But Tyler, you did the deep dive.
Yeah, and one of the things I try to chart while I'm doing my film study is like how many defenders are rushing on every drop back, and that play that Riley Leonard sort of ran into his own offensive line was the only time I think that Navy dropped 8 into coverage. Otherwise, I had them rushing at least 4 on passing plays. So I teams that this isn't the first time teams have done this. I do think Leonard will run against that. I think Leonard did a really good job of scrambling that one play aside. He did a poor job, but I think Leonard, a lot of his rushing yards came off of scrambles versus design runs. A lot more frequently this season, his rushing yards have come off design runs. But against Navy, he was making quick decisions and deciding to run off of dropbacks and recognizing sort of running lanes, and certainly having the help of his offensive line and running backs in blocking downfield in those situations too. So I don't think it's a major issue for Notre Dame moving forward. I don't think it has been. But obviously there's situations where Riley Leonard has to make sure he's not running into his own offensive line. All right, next question is from at Charles W. Wolf. Do you expect the same offensive line to take the field against Florida State as played against Navy, or a shuffling, or maybe a new face or two?
I think it's probably going to be the same. Marcus Freeman, after the game, certainly left it open to interpretation on whether that would be the case. But I think I like Billy Schrouth at left guard. I think it'll help Anthony Knapp. I like the fact that Rocco and Emil now have 6 games together. I think that he wants to keep the competition going for Pendleton to win a job. I just don't think he can overtake Schrouth. It would have to be Rocco, and maybe there's a game where that makes some sense. But I would expect, I would more probable than not, it's going to be the same line against Florida State.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'll be the same. I don't have any indication that it wouldn't be. I don't. I do think there. I think Notre Dame would consider changes if it felt like that was necessary, but I didn't see major issues in the Navy game that were like, you know what, they can't play Rocco Spindler. They have to put Sam Pendleton back in. That's at least not my observation, so I don't think that's what will happen. All right, next question is from Phil from Litchfield, Connecticut. In your opinion, who is the most impressive Notre Dame freshman based on game day performance this year?
I think for me, it was pretty easily Kingston Viliamu Asa for a long time. And I probably would continue that. But Leonard Moore has come into the picture really quickly. Um, and if we get to the end of the season, that may be the answer at that point. But I do think Kingston Viliamu Asa has been the guy.
Yeah, I would go with Moore. I think he has done such a good, like, I know his playing opportunities aren't the same and he's been playing different roles. But when he has played the most, he's playing as the guy. He's not someone rotating in and
Yeah.
being part of a rotation. And so like there's not really anywhere to hide when you're in that situation. And I think
Yeah.
he's done a good job. So for that reason, I would give more the nod ahead of Kingston Viliamu, but obviously both are very talented freshmen and have
Let
bright
me
futures.
ask you something, Tyler. I got this question in chat that was somewhat similar to this. It was which of the freshmen, any of them, whether they've played or not this year, do you think have the highest ceiling at this point?
Um,
And I think my answer will surprise you. So they gave some multiple choice questions, but they said anybody, they threw Bryce Young in there, KVA,
yeah,
Leonard Moore.
Bryce Young was the first one that came to mind for me when you talk about highest ceiling. It just feels like I mean, he's already a huge guy, but he can certainly add more weight, and I think there's a lot of growth that's coming in his game, and I think has happened just in the last year or two in his game. So that might be the one that I would circle. I think Gerby Lambert could be in that discussion as well. Um, I guess like it depends like how you want to look at it. At the highest ceiling, does that mean like all American at the college level, or does that mean a first round draft back in the NFL? I know people can have their opinions on what they value more and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Um, and like being like a top end defensive lineman and offensive lineman certainly would increase your NFL draft stock versus maybe a cornerback. If you want to include Leonard Moore in that. So if you maybe pick one, I'd probably go Bryce Young.
I ended up, I think that's a good one. I thought about KVA, I thought about Leonard Moore, I thought about a lot of guys, but I ended up going with CJ Carr. I
Yeah,
went
I
out on a
mean,
limb.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a good answer as well. The ceiling is extremely high there, and obviously we haven't seen any of it this fall, but yeah, if he lives up to what many people believe he is, I think he's someone that deserves to be in that conversation, and I think probably is definitely someone I should have mentioned, but without having pulled up a list of the names in front of me, that one didn't
Right.
come to mind. All right, next one is from ND Navy 86 on the Insider Lounge. There is a lot of discussion on blame for the injuries this year with regard to Lauren Lando's or Marcus Freeman's imposed practice workload. As the season progresses, I also see a very intentional effort to limit workload on regulars and those returning from injury. I wonder if that will prove to be a valuable strategy to keep healthy through a long stretch of 4 games and hopefully a subsequent playoff bid. I don't recall during Brian Kelly's tenure the depth or foresight to rotate to this extent. The plan then seemed to play Drew Tranquil for 80 snaps all season. Is this philosophy a positive in Marcus's development, in your opinion?
Um, Let me address the BK thing. Um, I think in terms of BK being plugged into sports science and injury prevention and that kind of stuff, that all changed after the 2016 season. So I want to set the stage there. I think before that, BK was kind of old school. If you lost, you had longer practices no matter what, if it was better for you. Now, how does that play into the rotation and stuff? Again, I don't know that it was so much injury prevention recovery with Brian as it was if we rotate a lot of defensive linemen, more guys will buy in, we'll build depth, and we will wear down the other team's offense. I don't know that it was as much uh, to injury prevention. Now, again, late in Brian Kelly's career, one thing that he learned for Drew Tranquil was the amount of intentionality that Drew put in recovery. And I think that opened Brian's eyes to how important that aspect was. Um, he's we've had a bunch of conversations, Brian Kelly and I did, about Drew Tranquil on how he changed everything in the program in a lot of ways, and that was one of them. Especially when Drew was on that non degree seeking, when he already had his degree and he was in that and he had time to do the recovery. So that's where I would look at it. I don't know that I think a lot of what Marcus doing is a positive. I think the five linebacker rotation is more, they have five guys who can flat out play
Yeah.
more than it is, oh, let's save some wear and tear on Jalen Sneed.
I agree. I don't see I don't, to me, there's nothing clear in what Marcus Freeman is doing with his players in terms of their snaps per game that is that different than what Brian Kelly was doing in terms of like trying to prevent them from injury. Now, I mean, I guess if you talk about like Mitchell Evans, like him being limited and coming back from an ACL, but I mean, he is coming back from an ACL, so that is playing into that. I mean, I don't think that's a Marcus Freeman decision necessarily. I think that's the training staff that's helping provide the answers there. Um, I did a little bit of research to try to see like snap differences. Tranquil's final season was 2018. He played 61 snaps per game. Tavon Coney played more than him that year. He played 70 per game. Compare that to JD Bertrand last year, only played 54 snaps per game. Xavier Watts is the one that plays the most right now.
Yeah.
He's playing 60 snaps per game. Kaiser is only playing 37 snaps per game. Who you would maybe compare that to, but I don't think Kaiser's as good as Drew Tranquil. And also there is a rotation and they're blowing out teams more than they did in 2018. So that's helped them so far this season. So I don't see a big difference in that. Do I think how it's been handled will help Notre Dame down the stretch? I think that there is reason to believe that, but also Notre Dame has suffered a lot of injuries already, so it can't afford to suffer them anymore. All right, next question is from Marie Biafore at Biafore_Marie. Lots of interesting games this weekend. Which team winning the following games would help Notre Dame more and why? Ohio State versus Penn State and Pittsburgh versus SMU.
I mean, I don't know that either of those do. I think the games that affect Notre Dame most are the teams that they've played, and I think Texas A&M, South Carolina trumps all that. If Texas A&M continues to win, wins the SEC, that helps Notre Dame more than anything. If I had to pick between the two that you gave me, Marie, I would say probably Pittsburgh SMU just because it takes an undefeated team out of it. Although if Pittsburgh went undefeated all the way, they would be the ACC champ, and that wouldn't affect Notre Dame's seeding. So that's how I would look at that. I mean, I think maybe Ohio State losing to Penn State and giving them a second loss
Yeah.
would also, because I only have Ohio State ranked one spot ahead of Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's what I went with, would be Ohio State losing, because I think then it makes it possible that Ohio State doesn't make the playoffs. So that just adds another team that Notre Dame maybe isn't competing with. Like, do you think, like, because then in that scenario, then Ohio State's probably not making it to the Big Ten championship game. And so they're going to end their season with 2 losses, and their impressive victories will be limited, right? Like
Yeah,
they're not going to have a better win
they're
than Notre Dame against Texas A&M.
right. I mean, Indiana and Michigan are the last spots to impress for them. Now, again, they have an impressive loss, but the committee doesn't, at least in past years, hasn't really given a lot of credit for a good loss.
Yeah. All right. Next one from Marie. She said, since it's the bye week, let's talk playoff scenarios. If Notre Dame is not a 5 through 8 seed, are they better off being 11 or 12 seed as opposed to a 9 or 10 seed? The logic being that if you win the first game as an 11 or 12, you would get to play a 3 or 4 seed in the second round, which would be an easier game since there's a lot of parity between 5 and 12. The difference being 9 and 10 or 11 and 12 in the first round seems like it would be less.
Um, I've seen that in the men's basketball tournament where sometimes being like a 10 you had an easier path. And I guess the philosophy would be in a 12 team anyways, but there's a chance if you can hold off playing that number one seed that maybe somebody knocks them off for you. Um, but I think the difference, like if you're 10, 11, 12 versus 5, 6, and 7, man, the 5 seed might be really, really tough. I
Mhm.
mean, right now it would be Georgia, um, assuming Texas A&M is the SEC champ. There's going to be the potential for some really difficult 5 seeds. So I would just want to go for the best seed that I could and take my chances there.
Yeah, I mean, it all like the seeding stuff, like that's all like theoretical, but then when it comes to the actual, what matters most is like, okay, who is the actual team? It's not like the 5 seed. Is it like if it's Georgia, then it's a different like that's maybe different than a different 5 seed. Then maybe say Penn State ends up as a 5 seed or something like that. Like you would probably feel better about playing at Penn State than you would playing at Georgia. Um, so I think it's more about who the teams are, the matchups and the venues than it is about the seed number itself. Um, like in that instance, like I think we talked about it in the reverse if um or it was I think we used the athletics model that had like number 7 Notre Dame versus number 10 Clemson,
Mhm.
and then playing number 2 Miami. Like in that model, it's like, yeah, well, Miami at number 2 feels a little bit vulnerable right now, but like there could be a different 2 seed that doesn't feel as vulnerable in a different mapped out version of the playoff, depending on who gets those seeds.
Right.
So I think it's hard to sort of you can talk about it in theory, but until you know who those teams are, it becomes a different equation. All right, LDL Go Irish on the Insider Lounge has one for or a pair of questions for this bye-week podcast. Let me ask a hypothetical. If you were the college football playoff committee and the following happens, Indiana wins every game except Ohio State. Same for Penn State. And then a one-loss Ohio State team loses to Oregon in the big championship game. Then IU has one loss. Penn State has one loss. Ohio State has 2 losses, both close to Oregon. And Oregon finishes undefeated. All games I mentioned here assumed to be close games. How would you, as the college football playoff committee, rank these 4 Big Ten schools? Do you rank a 2-loss team ahead of one-loss teams they have beaten head-to-head?
It depends because you can't boil it down just to those elements. You need to look at a team's entire resume. For example, in the Big 12, Iowa State isn't playing anywhere near the difficult schedule that BYU is. And there are Big 10 scenarios. Iowa, if they were in it, I'm sorry, I'm picking on the state of Iowa. They play a much less difficult schedule than a lot of other Big 10 teams. So you have to look at the whole schedule and look at all the scores. But in trying to answer the question and saying all things being equal beyond that, right now I have Penn State third, Ohio State sixth, Notre Dame seventh, and IU 11th. Um, if Ohio State beat Penn State and IU, and then their only other loss was to an undefeated number one Oregon, yes, I would. Everything else being equal on those schedules, which it probably isn't, I would pick Ohio State with 2 losses. I don't think you default to fewer losses because teams aren't playing the same schedules, not even in the same conference. So,
Yeah, at least of what we know of the schedules that Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana have already played and who they're scheduled to play. And obviously who they're scheduled to play could look different. Like we don't know
uh,
what those like how good
I've looked them over because I do every week when I make the rankings, so I know what they have left. So,
so yeah, I mean so then I have the same order. It would be Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana in that order. And then um the second part of LDL's question was assuming ND wins comfortably, controlling the game against Florida State, Virginia, and Army, and then beats USC by 10. Similarly to Texas A&M, where ND pulls away late. Where does ND fit into this Big Ten group?
given everything that the scenarios that he said, so Ohio State then would have 2 good wins suddenly. They don't have any right now. They would have wins over Penn State and over Indiana. Um, but then they lose to Oregon. I I some of it again depends on what Texas A&M's doing. If Texas A&M is the SEC champ, to me, Notre Dame would be higher than Ohio State. They certainly would be higher than Penn State and IU in that scenario. But Texas A&M could fall down. They could lose to South Carolina this week. They could lose to Texas. The Texas A&M thing is a real important data point for Notre Dame. But let's just assume they win out, then I would have Notre Dame ahead of all those Big Ten teams in that scenario.
I think I would put Notre Dame between Penn State and Ohio State where I laid them out. So it would be Oregon, and then Ohio State, and then Notre Dame, and then Penn State, then Indiana. I think a two-loss Ohio State team when its only losses are at Oregon and on a neutral site against Oregon, who is an undefeated team in that scenario. Like to me, that's better than beating Texas A&M and losing to Northern Illinois. So I would put Ohio State ahead of Notre Dame.
Would you dock, and Drew Aller isn't playing for Penn State, so let's say Ohio State wins a close game at Penn State this weekend. Do you deduct points for that, or is it win a win
A win's a
against?
win, and because it's on the road, right?
Yeah.
It's at Penn State, so that
Okay.
that that adds value to that win to me, even if it is a
Okay.
different quarterback.
Sure.
All right, next is and that's a big part of like not only did Notre Dame lose to Northern Illinois, but they lost to Northern Illinois at home, and I think that makes it even worse. All right, Kevin from Calgary, from Eric's chat asks, I'm wondering if, unlike the pollsters who finally showed the Irish some love this week, you think the playoff committee will be far less impressed by Notre Dame's resume come next Tuesday, particularly when it comes to the fact the Irish don't play this weekend. I know the schedule is drawn up years in advance, excuse me, but it seems like unfortunate bad timing for a bye weekend, and the Irish could be jumped by teams that do play Saturday. I am also concerned if they're not in a playoff position next Tuesday, 4 wins against less than tough competition will leave them on the outside looking in. No matter how you slice it, the committee will be looking at Big Ten and SEC teams with 2 losses above ND. How do you see it?
Um, I don't, I mean, the committee, when they get together, and it'll be after the bye week, um, and Notre Dame not playing, they're going to look at the whole season. They're not
Yeah,
looking at just this season. I think sometimes maybe especially with fans, I think there's overreaction to just what happened in that week, and probably to a certain extent pollsters. That's why before I cast my vote, I go back and look through the whole season. For example, Oregon just getting by Boise State looked
looks
like
better.
not a
Yeah.
really good outcome early in the year. Now it looks more impressive, and it looks for both teams. Beating Florida State was such a feather in your cap early in the year. Well, now everybody's beating them, except for Cal. So that devalues some of the, you know, mojo you would get for beating Florida State. So I don't think it's going to be a problem when their bye week comes. I think the biggest challenge for Notre Dame will be the perception of their November schedule. So they'll have to look very good against that November schedule because some other teams will be playing more difficult teams with much more octane. Notre Dame really needs to hope that USC is, 7-4 when they're playing them, and hope that Army's undefeated when they play them.
Yeah, like the phrase that sticks out to me is like that the Irish could be jumped by teams. Well, there's nothing to jump in the playoff committee's rankings because as those haven't been made yet. So like if Notre Dame is ranked higher or lower in the playoff committee's rankings versus the coaches poll or the AP poll or Eric Hansen's most important AP poll submission, like it wouldn't be described as a jump in my opinion. Like that's just where this is what the committee thinks, and this is the first time they're weighing in on what's been done this season. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. And like the last part of the question, no matter how you slice it, the committee will be looking at Big Ten and SEC teams with 2 losses above ND. Like that's way too broad of a statement. Like a 2-loss Indiana team is not going to be ahead of Notre Dame. And so like maybe the top end Big Ten teams, like if the ones that have played the best schedules, maybe there are 1 or 2 of those, or I think probably more likely SEC teams than Big Ten teams if we're talking about this. Um, so I think I wouldn't be that concerned, but both about the timing or like the certainly the competition Notre Dame plays on the stretch matters, but I don't think like it's as simple as it was boiled down to in this question.
Right. And some of the SEC teams hurt themselves in that multiple loss scenario. Alabama losing to Vanderbilt, although Vanderbilt I think is a decent team, and Tennessee losing to Arkansas, that's different than Alabama losing to Tennessee. Those aren't the same quality losses. So when those teams play each other, then instead of having two losses, you have three losses in some of those cases.
All right, next question is from Bob Oxnard on the Insider Lounge. Do you think we will land any additional 2025 receivers? And if so, who?
I'm going to go with Tyler on this one.
Yeah, my answer is yes, but I don't know who yet. Isaiah Mizell is the one that they've been working on in terms of most recently visiting. Derek Meadows, I think, is still a long shot in terms of Notre Dame having conversations there. I haven't even included him on the heat index because unless he makes it up to Notre Dame for a visit, I don't think it really matters. The best chance might be someone we don't know about yet, in terms of who ends up in Notre Dame's class, and Notre Dame's going to continue to work on trying to get a fourth. But we don't know who that is right now. All right, next question is from Stan from Siberia, Indiana. Next year will be almost all Freeman's recruits. Will there be less than 3 incoming transfers? Will Billy Schrauth be the only offensive lineman still on the first string? Will Will Black or Owen Strebig be starting by October? Would Anthony Knapp at 320 pounds change your answer?
Let's start with the Billy Schrauth part of that, and we'll take these one at a time. Billy Schrauth, no, I think at least Emil Wagner will be starting, and there certainly could be more than that. Anthony Knapp could be a guard, but I think Schrauth and Emil are kind of the ones that I would think are most likely be starters. But yeah, you're adding a lot of other people into the mix, so it's going to be if assuming everybody stays, it's going to be a lot of competition. The thing is, I don't know that Ashton Craig is going to be on a timetable where he's going to be able to compete for a starting spot in August and September. It just depends on his timetable for his ACL tear. But remember, that happened in September. So he may not be ready to go when the season starts. And then Pat Coogan would be a great alternative there.
Yeah, in terms of I agree with you. I think it's like Schrauth and Wagner are 1A and 1B in terms of guys that are most likely to start next season. A lot of the guys that could start at tackle next year with Jagasa and Knapp, I think both of them can also be guards, and they're more likely to be guards in my opinion than Wagner. So I think that it only adds to the likelihood that Wagner remains a starter at the tackle position, and those other guys, if they don't win the left tackle spot, could be a guard. In terms of Will Black and Owen Strebig being starting by October, I don't see that. I don't think they'll start next year. I mean, I think there's too much talent ahead of those guys that would allow and necessitate you needing freshmen to start on this offensive line. Anthony Knapp's weight certainly would make a difference in where he ends up. But I think it's more than just weight too. So I know I jumped ahead to some of those questions that Eric didn't answer. Do you have any differing opinions on Will Black or Owen Strebig or Anthony Knapp?
I think it would be really difficult for those freshmen, as talented as they are, to jump over all those guys that you just mentioned and Garby Lambert without there being people abducted by aliens. I think that is the only scenario where that would happen. And Anthony Knapp at 320 doesn't do it. I think he's going to be a better player when he gets bigger and stronger, but I don't think it changes my calculus on the question. And then we still have one part of the question.
Yeah. Circling back to the first part, will there be less than 3 incoming transfers?
No, I can't see a scenario where that happens. It's not about it being Marcus's recruits or not. Now, what we have to see is who are the outgoing transfers. That's a big part of the calculation there. The transfer portal will open up the Monday after Selection Sunday, so that'll be in early December after they pick the playoff teams. And the signing period will be over then. So Notre Dame will know exactly what they have in the recruiting class. And I think Marcus will have a pretty good feel for who's going in the portal. But I can think, I mean, just right off the top, you're a nickel, a kicker, probably an interior defensive lineman, maybe a wide receiver. I don't know that it'll be as many as this year, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be fewer than three.
Yeah, I agree. I think you laid that all out well. Like, I don't think it's going to be huge class, but it won't be that small. That would be a surprise if it were three or less. All right. Our last question is from Enforcers 2117. Thoughts on Indy opening up next year at Miami, and also, do you think they will use a bye week the next week before playing Texas A&M at home?
I was looking at their tentative 2025 schedule. So the Miami Herald was first to report that Notre Dame is going to play Miami in Miami Gardens opening weekend. The date hasn't been set yet by the TV people, which is ESPN, ABC, but it's going to be sometime Labor Day weekend. And right now there is a space on the schedule, and then a Texas A&M game at home, kind of in the middle of September. Um, but not all the games have been placed in the schedule yet. There are other games that still have to be placed in the schedule, and there needs to be one more game added. It will I mean, right now the configuration is 7 home and 4 away, so it's either going to be a Shamrock Series game. I would think it would have to be a home game. I don't know why they would schedule an away game, so they'll either have 8 home games or they'll go 7, 4, and 1. Um, so not knowing where the other games are being placed in the schedule, kind of blindly doing that, I probably would take a bye week between Miami and Texas A&M.
Do you
I'd think
think
about it.
do you do you think this means the end of the Stanford series then?
Um,
Because there's 11 games. They need a 12th game. Do you think it's Stanford? Or do you think it's someone else?
when I spoke with Pete Bavacqua in the spring, he told me that Stanford wanted to continue the series and Notre Dame wanted to continue the series. But I think the hang up there, and this is not what he said to me, but this is what the vibe I was getting from other people, was that Notre Dame wanted Stanford to count as part of their ACC commitment every year, and if they're going to play them, and that I'm not sure that that was reciprocal, and that could at least cause a pause in the series. Miami would be the 5th ACC game on that schedule. Now, Notre Dame has played 6, but it's to compensate for playing 4 in another year. So I'm not sure about the whole Stanford thing. It could be Stanford, and then that game would be, I, I would imagine, I guess it could be out at Stanford, but I'm not sure. That's one thing in covering 2 basketball games last night I was able to dig into.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, so, like, to me, I think my opinion would be you don't take the bye week that early, and you schedule a MAC or an FCS team or Sun Belt, whatever,
Right.
name your lower level opponent, in between Miami and Texas
Not
A&M.
Northern Illinois.
But then that would mean then there's no Stanford on the schedule, and I don't know that we know for sure that wouldn't happen. So you wonder, like, well, because Miami is an ACC team, does this have anything to do with them trying to figure out, okay, can we play Stanford as an ACC game versus not an ACC game, and keep it going uninterrupted next season? We don't know. I don't know the answer to that right now. So
Notre Dame used to put all the future ACC opponents in their game notes. I've noticed they haven't been doing that lately,
so we'll see.
I was looking for them last night.
We'll see if what that. But I mean, starting the year at Miami, I think so. It's a big time game. It certainly, at least on paper, makes it I think probably a better schedule than Notre Dame has this year. Although, like, if we wouldn't have said that necessarily, I wouldn't be as convinced of that if you just asked me at the beginning of this season, because although I guess Texas A&M is probably better than I thought they would be. But
They
Florida
also
State,
have a road game to Arkansas, and then they
right?
play USC. I was looking at the schedule. They
It looks
play at
tough,
Pitt next year. Now, Pitt may not be any good next year, but
right?
they are this year.
Right. Yeah. So it looks like a tough schedule. But we know that what things definitely evolve in terms of what you think of something going into it, and usually folks who don't like Notre Dame will always discredit the schedule regardless. All right, that is it for today's episode of the Inside ND Sports Podcast. If you don't already, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other popular podcast platforms. If you like what you hear, give us a star rating, leave a review, and share our podcast feed with someone who has a good cheeseburger recipe. As I mentioned earlier, we're offering a 30-day free trial of InsideNDSports.com to our podcast listeners. If you want to try out a subscription to the site, just use promo code NDPOD when you sign up for a subscription. You can also find a link to the deal in the podcast description or show notes. And as always, even though it's a bye week, we have plenty of written content over on InsideNDSports.com. So stick with us for all your Notre Dame football coverage needs.